My housing agenda will create opportunities for new generational wealth, simplify nearly 300 separate zoning categories, and create complete neighborhoods and reduce permitting timelines and other barriers to development.
Well, that's Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell right there talking about housing and a comprehensive plan that would add housing density to every Seattle neighborhood, he says. So why are critics saying this is not nearly enough? Plus, we're talking about a new plan from King County to fight fentanyl. We're talking about Republicans declaring victory in Olympia after a vote on 3 initiatives and a major upheaval in Seattle's municipal court. All this and more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, and I am joined once again by my co-host, David Croman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. David, just checking in. How did your first experience with Kraken hockey go over the weekend? I think you were there at Climate Pledge for a loss. How did it go?
It was super fun. I'd never been to a hockey game before. They did lose. Anytime I go to like a Seahawks game or a Sounders game, or in this case, a Kraken game where I don't usually go,
right?
It seems like they never score.
So
they did get 1 goal though. So yeah, no, but it was super fun.
All right. Well, we'll blame you if they don't make the playoffs or something along those lines, or I hope not. Thank you, David, for joining us. Thanks to all of our patrons. A shout out to Christina for supporting the show as a patron. And here's hoping the rest of you listening out there follow her lead. At the $5 a month level, we will answer your questions right here on the podcast and give you access to patrons' first episodes as well. What a great deal. A big thanks also to Converge Media. The video version of the podcast airs on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get going here, right now. Well, after a week of protests and arrests at Seattle City Council's full council meeting, a calmer week for the city, but behind the scenes, a flurry of activity. Mayor Bruce Harrell has released his recommendations for the city's comprehensive plan. This is the blueprint of how we're going to achieve more housing growth in Seattle over the next 10 years. The plan would allow for more homes in the city's residential neighborhoods, including adding more ADUs, those accessory dwelling units, up to 4 or 6 in some cases, if they are deemed affordable or near enough to transit. The mayor says his plan would create a path towards 100,000 new homes over the next 20 years, and that's really where the question marks start here. King County says we need 112,000 over that time period, and many critics are saying what the mayor is proposing maybe gives us half of what we need, with 1 million people expected to move here over the new 2 decades. David, help us break this down here. Does the mayor's comprehensive plan go far enough? How do you look at this?
On paper, it does expand density in every neighborhood. Right now, if you do ADUs or a DADU, you can build up to 3 units on single family lots. This bumps that to 4, or even as much as 6 if you're near major transit stops, which a lot of Seattle is. You can go higher than that if you add some affordable units. So on paper, it does increase capacity. The thing that will be interesting to watch is whether the city has done enough to make this pencil out for developers who might be interested here, because one criticism of this is that while it adds the number of possible units you could build per lot, it doesn't increase the amount of square footage that housing can take up on that lot.
I see.
Basically, what you would have to do as a developer is fit 4 homes into the square footage that is already allowed for 3 homes. And so, that kind of raises the question of whether, this does enough to kind of incentivize developers to actually want to act on this. I don't think we'll know that for a while until kind of, processes and permitting starts moving forward. And then, another criticism is that it basically preserves the framework that the city has functioned on for the last 30 years, which is concentrating development in these neighborhood urban villages, and then not kind of expanding those out or allowing much more development in the single family neighborhood. So while there might be some sort of marginal density gains in the single family neighborhoods, the bulk of the growth is probably going to continue in the areas that it already has been happening.
Interesting. And I know the mayor was saying this, and you reported this in the Seattle Times. This is sort of a floor, not a ceiling, I guess, in terms of the expectations. I wanted to talk about that in terms of what the mayor is doing. I've heard the criticism that it doesn't go far enough. That's why I brought it up. And this whole idea of establishing this floor, it doesn't seem like a bold enough plan, I guess, to some people.
Yeah, they say 100,000. This would result in 100,000 units. I think the thing that is surprising when you hear that number is their estimates show that without doing anything different, that there would be 80,000 units added. So that's kind of saying that this new plan clears the way for 20,000 additional units over 20 years. That's not like a ton more when you're talking about 200,000 new people moving here over the next 20 years. I think that what the city would say, though, is that 100,000 estimate is kind of bare minimum, and they expect that it would probably exceed that. The amount of capacity or theoretical capacity this adds is a lot more than that. But then yet another counter is that, you look at a place like Bellevue and they have planned for 150,000 and that's, a much smaller city.
Right. And I just think this is going to be so interesting to watch how this plays out with the city council, because this plan came out late. There was talk of it being released last year. That clearly didn't happen. We're left with this timeline now that seems kind of close. The comprehensive plan, the state law says, has to be finalized by December 31st of this year. And I think this sets up, as I can see it, one of the first real tests of the city council's alliance and allegiance to the mayor here. Yes, he endorsed the majority of them. Yes, he helped them get their seats. But with this plan, they're not going to be answering just to him. They're answering to the constituents in their districts who, are going to challenge some of the details here, either on the conservative or the more left side of things. I just wanted to talk about what happens now. The council has to approve this plan. Most of that activity goes through the Land Use Committee, chaired by Tammy Morales, who, by the way, is not one of the candidates that Harrell endorsed here, just putting that out there. How do you see this process playing out with the city council, David?
Yeah, I think Tammy Morales will push for more density, more opportunities for growth. But I don't know what the rest of the council would do. I would be, they might push for marginal changes in their own neighborhoods. But I would say that this is fairly close to the vision that a lot of them expressed on the campaign trail.
Okay.
This looks most, we try to avoid going down these wonky paths too much, but this proposal kind of looks most similarly to the alternative 5 pitch.
Right. Yeah. There's that alternative 6 that was pushing for more. Anyway, keep going.
Which was never really studied in depth, but which is basically endorsing a strategy of more housing, more density in the places where it already exists, along arterials and urban villages. Okay. A little bit more in the places where it doesn't, but not to the level that you would expect.
Okay.
Apartment buildings and single family homes. And so, I don't know. I don't know that we have a super clear vision. Frankly, the city council hasn't talked a lot about this. They've talked more about public safety and police and things like that than they have housing. But I guess I would be surprised if this city council goes in the direction of more density and more housing. I think they're probably going to get a lot of, whenever we talk about housing, there tends to be a lot of pressure from the people who have lived in their neighborhoods for a long time and don't want to see change and, tend to get organized and push back on this sort of thing. Yeah. I wouldn't be totally surprised if the city council encounters something similar.
Got it. We'll see what happens there. And thank you for breaking that piece down with me. I wanted to switch gears, if I could, with you to an announcement this week from King County. The county announcing 5 new priorities in addressing our fentanyl crisis. Your colleague Elise Takahama wrote about this in the Seattle Times. The county wants to improve access to community-based treatment, increase behavioral health beds and facilities, get more overdose reversal medication out there and fentanyl testing, also broaden the county's behavioral health workforce, and also reduce disproportionality in overdoses. That's a big issue as well. Piece of cake, should have this done by next week, right? Just some urgency here. You've heard all the stats. In 2023, we had this record number of fatal overdoses from fentanyl, 1,082, and that's 51% more than the record set in 2022. One big ticket item I saw out there, a 16-bed residential treatment center for people with mental health or substance use disorders, should be operating in the city of Seattle by about 6 months. Plus, the county's talking about a 24/7 sobering center, a 24/7 buprenorphine prescribing line. That's the drug that helps with overdoses here, and some more mobile treatment teams on the streets. I just wanted to break this down with you, David, because it's a big headline, but I'm still left with the question, what is this? What impact, I guess, is this going to have? Because the county was investing a lot of money in fentanyl issues last year as well.
The tough thing is some of these strategies are still a bit rooted in a time when heroin was kind of the main problem, and you maybe some fentanyl would sneak in, and you want to test for it, and you have these overdose kits. The problem with fentanyl is it's now kind of taken over. It's just much quicker. It's much more powerful. overdose reversal doesn't work always on fentanyl. And, I think there was some thought before with, the supervised consumption sites, people
Yes.
needed places to go and use drugs, and maybe that would be an opportunity to connect and build relationships with them.
Right.
Fentanyl, it doesn't need that as much because a lot of them are just pills. You're just popping pills. So,
Yep.
I think it's a step. I don't know that I've heard like a great answer for how this varies. How this is specifically tailored towards the challenges of fentanyl versus challenges of heroin, and how this kind of will behave differently.
Yeah, a very interesting point there, especially when you talk about consumption and how it happens. It's a much quicker process and a much cheaper process with fentanyl, too, when they're buying tablets for less than $1 a piece. I did want to follow up on something from last week you brought up with me. We were talking about which local government should be helping refugees and asylum seekers. You noted that the county has been pushing back a little bit on the city has been pushing back a little bit on the county, saying, all right, these asylum seekers, this has got to be a county issue, a state issue. Those agencies need to take care of this, not the city of Seattle. Do you sense a similar push on this issue with fentanyl? Because the mayor's office did put out a statement after this Monday press conference saying, we're working on this together. We've got Seattle's Health 99 team out there on the overdose cases, but it wasn't those, hey, we're standing shoulder to shoulder kind of press conferences. Am I reading too much into that? What do you think?
No, I don't think you are reading too much into it. I mean, he and Council President Sarah Nelson have both, they say the language about we're all in this together, and we are supportive. And of course, the city puts a lot of money towards these county efforts. But at the same time, they are, they do take a moment to make the point that they see this as the primary responsibility of Public Health Seattle King County. Which Seattle, of course, has a stake in. I mean, they're involved and they spend a lot of money there. But
they have members from the city council that are on that board. Keep going. Yep.
Right. But the feeling is increasingly, and this is kind of parallel to the Regional Homelessness Authority, which is we're spending a lot of money on this, and not a lot of conviction that money is doing what the city wants it to do. So what they do want it to do, I'm not sure, but I feel like there has been a little more of a rift between the city and the county on this, where the city basically sees it as the county's responsibility, but at the same time, the city has kind of bought a stake, so to speak, in that effort, and that stake they believe should give them more of a say in exactly how these efforts are moving forward.
Right, and they're looking for a bigger return on the investment, if you will. I've definitely heard that on the homelessness front, too. Well, thank you for that, David, and I wanted to move on with you if I could. We're talking about 3 initiatives from the conservative group Let's Go Washington. They have just been passed by the state legislature. Republicans doing a victory dance down on the state capitol. How will these bills affect taxes, public safety, our schools, and what does this mean for the November election? We're going to break down some details on Now Hear This. Well, over this past week, state lawmakers have decided to pass 3 of the 6 initiatives presented by Let's Go Washington. One banning a state income tax, another one, a parent's bill of rights regarding what parents are entitled to know about instructional materials in our public schools, and one on police chases. This one really had the most debate. Democrats said rolling the legal standard back to police simply having a reasonable suspicion the person they want to chase has broken the law will result in more fatalities, but Republicans say this will be an important tool to fight against criminal activity.
We lead the nation, or nearly lead the nation, in retail theft and auto theft. We've had sadly, all kinds of new records broken when it comes to crime. And this is one step, an important step, but only one step to get us back in the right direction.
That's Senator John Braun, the minority leader of the state Senate, the Republican from the 20th District down in Centralia. And David, it's important to point out that the other 3 bills presented by Let's Go Washington to repeal the Climate Commitment Act and its carbon market, to get rid of our new capital gains tax, and to eliminate that payroll tax that pays for long-term care in our state, those will be on the ballot, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I wanted to talk about the impact of passing these 3 initiatives and what this really means. This Parents' Bill of Rights, a little bit confusing. It won't supersede any federal protections of privacy when it comes to health matters. That's a big issue there. The income tax vote didn't really do anything to help with our tax burden. The police chases, I guess we'll see how this plays out. What was your takeaway from this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd be curious to know. I'd be curious to know what the polling shows. I mean,
Yeah.
polling on referendum or on initiatives is always really finicky, but I have to think it showed that these all had a pretty good shot at passing. Otherwise, I'd be surprised if Democrats would have done.
That's why legislators put them to a vote, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Which is why I think Democrats were probably willing to take them up. The Parental Bill of Rights, I frankly don't entirely understand that.
Me either. Yeah.
What it does differently than what already exists. The income tax, I think that's probably an acknowledgement that just taxes like that have always done really badly on the ballot. And so I suppose the Democrats figured they would rather have a hand in crafting that legislation rather than turn it totally over to voters. Yeah. And the police chase one, I think there has been some good faith debate over what has happened as a result of that pursuit law. I mean, I think it is true that police pursuits, and there was some reporting out of San Francisco about this, police pursuits do sometimes end worse than the thing that
initially trying to stop. Yeah.
The dispute. Like if you're gunning 90 down residential streets to catch somebody for shoplifting, the risk of that outweighs probably the benefit to society.
And there are some law enforcement agencies within the state who are already saying, hey, I know that the state legislature did this, but we're sticking to what we do already when it comes to police chases. Please keep going.
Right. But on the other hand, I think there has been a lot of, and it's hard exactly to know. I mean, it's sort of anecdotal in a lot of ways to know exactly the effect of this law, but we do hear from a lot of law enforcement agencies that people are saying, hey, you're not allowed to chase me, or you're not allowed to arrest me. I know the laws.
Yeah.
Again, it's hard to know how often that's happening, what actual effect that's having. But clearly the sort of political pressure that came of those anecdotes was enough that that it seemed like it was sort of inevitable that there was going to be some alteration to this law.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I wanted to jump back and figure out what was going on with the capital gains tax vote. I don't know if you can follow this logic, but this is what was going through my head on this. So we just put into law that we won't have a state income tax. That's what this initiative was all about. And it almost seems to me to validate the point that capital gains are not an income tax, which is what the state Supreme Court said. So I just see these tactics surrounding the vote on capital gains, which has been, hey, watch out, they're going to come for your income next, little, middle class person in Washington state. Maybe that doesn't seem to hold as much weight now with this income tax ban. What do you think about that? I was very interested to see how that played out, and I'm very interested to see how it might affect this capital gains tax vote, that initiative in November.
Yeah, it's, if you talk to people at the Washington Policy Institute, they think it's absurd that the capital gains tax is not considered an income tax
from the jump, right?
To their credit, most states do consider a capital gains tax an income tax.
That's right.
That is not the case in Washington, as the Supreme Court has said. It's basically an excise tax, which is a tax on the actual sale. I think the legislature was probably less willing to act on this because the capital gains tax is already being collected and committed.
That's right.
There is no income tax, so it's easier to kind of put a road barrier up in front of something that doesn't exist rather than to roll something back.
Right. Right.
Politically too, it's in some ways an easier case to make, which is, income tax. Everyone has income. It sounds kind of scary. Capital gains tax. Very few people are actually affected by the capital gains tax. You have to be a owner of stocks and be making a lot of money on their sale to be affected by this. That's not to say it's going to be a cakewalk on the ballot, but I at the end of the day, though, I just think it's the legislature has committed some of this money and is therefore going to be more protective of it than something that's more hypothetical. Yeah,
very good point. And the three initiatives that they did allow to go on to the ballot, those are very much, we're talking about taxes that are being collected right now. As you mentioned, we're talking about the carbon tax. We're talking about that capital gains tax. We're also talking about
the payroll tax.
The payroll tax for long-term care. Thank you very much. So, yeah, there's a lot to consider there. So we will see how that plays out on the ballot, and I'm interested to see how that all goes. But I wanted to turn our attention back to the city of Seattle, if I could, because buried on a Friday afternoon last week, late Friday afternoon, a press release from the city attorney's office about Seattle's municipal court. This is the group that handles misdemeanors, not the felonies. Those go to King County. City Attorney Ann Davison has removed first-time judge Pooja Vadati from handling more than 150 criminal cases. Davison's office claims that city prosecutors are not getting fair hearings and trials before Judge Vadati. There was no warning of this. The court had not heard about any issues with this judge prior to this removal. There's no record of the Superior Court reversing any of Vadati's rulings based on appeals from the city prosecutor's office, as reported by the stranger here. So state law, David, says that prosecutors, defense attorneys can disqualify up to one judge from a case with what's called an affidavit of prejudice. The CAO brought up some examples of Vadati failing to find probable cause for assault in a case where someone waved a fake gun at a victim, a DUI case where the judge released a person after 2 arrests in a week, some other cases too. But to block this judge from all criminal cases, it just feels like a big step to me, especially someone who's been publicly voted in here. What's going on here? Help us put this into context, please.
Yeah, this is super interesting. One important context is this is not unprecedented at all.
Right.
I wrote about this back when I was at Crosscut, but the Department of Public Defense basically did the same thing against Judge McKenna in 2019.
Right.
The difference there, and what's kind of interesting about this one difference there is the Department of Defense leadership they didn't put out a press release. They never fully acknowledged that this was like an internal strategy that they were telling their attorneys to do. I think it sort of strains credulity to think that they didn't understand that this was happening and were basically supportive of it because it was happening broadly and across many, many cases that DPD lawyers were filing these affidavits of prejudice to move off of Judge McKenna. This is interesting, though, that Davison is owning this policy, that they are stating that this is something that they have chosen to do. So, I think there is some talk about, ignoring the will of voters. And
sure.
I suppose there is some of that. I think to say that, you have to also ask whether the DPD defenders were ignoring the will of voters at the time. I think it kind of cuts both ways. But I guess I would be curious to know kind of what experts or, there's an ethics commission that can look into this kind of thing.
Sure.
Think about making it a policy of an office to do this, because again, that's different than sort of a wink and a nod and people doing it. At the end of the day, though, this is a tool that exists, and there's not any, as far as I know, there's not any limitation on it, except for that you can only do it once per case. So it's not like attorneys can bounce from judge to judge until they land on exactly the judge they want.
Right.
What it allows them to do is choose one judge that they do not want and then roll the dice on the other 5. I think it's 6. I actually don't remember how many there are. So it's interesting. I think it's important to remember that this has happened before in both directions. It does kind of show, I think, a frustration on the part of the city attorney's office with the results that they're getting in municipal court, though.
Right. And I guess the other part of it, too, and this is sort of the backstory, this is a court that is already overworked, and this is basically 150 criminal cases that'll have to be put out among a court that is kind of now hogtied with one fewer justice. I can't imagine that's going to make these cases go any quicker. No, certainly not. But I think the cases are moving so slowly already that they probably figure, why not? Yeah, right. Yeah, what's next? Well, indeed, thank you for that, David. I'm going to move on to our next issue here. We're taking some questions in from listeners, and we've got a great one about growth and density that has a more detailed answer than you might think. That's coming up on You Ask, We Answer. Okay, here's the segment of the show where we try to answer any questions that patrons send in about local government. We need your emails. Send them in to Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Spell it out at gmail.com. And thank you very much for your input. Really want to showcase what our patrons are asking here. And here's one, David, from Eric, who writes this. As the state and city are passing infill laws, talking about density here, do they override HOA covenants? Homeowners associations there. For instance, I was looking at the Elford Park Covenant, which is a community north of Carkeek. Every home in Elford Park has an acre of land, and the covenant says that you can only construct a second building on your land if it is for a servant in the employ of that homeowner. Will state and local zoning infill rules override that covenant and similar covenants in places like Broadmoor, Sandpoint, the Highlands, Blue Ridge, and so forth? The short answer to your question is no, Eric. These new laws will not override these homeowner agreements or covenants. And just to touch on that for a minute, David, I think that may have been another big knock on the mayor's plan. It is adding some growth, but some of these older, less diverse areas of the cities, like these HOA kind of neighborhoods, they won't really be affected by this, as I understand it.
Yeah, that's my understanding too, which also kind of goes to in this case, that's less on the city and more on the state legislation, which exempts these neighborhoods. So
right.
the city, if the city had just decided to do exactly what the state did, these areas would still be exempted. So yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think it sets up a scenario where, yeah, you look at these really rich neighborhoods, I think mostly of Broadmoor.
Sure, right.
Will not have to follow these. I would suspect if Broadmoor did have to follow these zoning changes, I would be very surprised if we saw any changes anyway, because people who live there have all agreed to these rules and therefore probably agree with them. And so I would be surprised if there's somebody in Broadmoor itching to redevelop their mansion into a fourplex or whatever it might be.
Sure.
But,
yeah.
But the theory is sort of striking, and these are basically gated communities and everything. Yeah. Maybe not literally, but pretty darn close. And this kind of, I would say, heightens that gate a little bit.
Yeah, and I did, Eric, also follow up on your question with Representative Mia Gregerson, the Democrat from the 33rd District, who was one of the sponsors of House Bill 1110, the so-called missing middle bill that the city of Seattle is trying to work with. So this will not affect any existing covenants, but any future HOAs are not allowed to prohibit this kind of housing, like duplexes and ADUs, etc. David, I was just thinking about this, how this might play out. I would almost imagine that neighborhoods would be less inclined to create covenants like this in the future if they're required to do this extra housing. Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I'd be curious when the last new covenant was created, or how often this is happening these days. My suspicion would be not that often. I mean, there are, I don't know if we call them covenants, but, of course, there's like condo associations. And associations and buildings. But as far as new neighborhood covenants go, I don't know. I mean, maybe at least in Seattle, I mean, I think they're fairly common in kind of suburban cul-de-sac developments, but I'd be curious to know when the last new one was in Seattle. I think a lot of covenants these days are kind of about like lawn height and, what you can put on your front porch and the color you can paint your house and things like that. And so I don't know that this would make them irrelevant, or even make them less appealing to people who want to live in neighborhoods like that. But it certainly changes the calculation on those covenants.
Yeah, and I just think about what you brought up earlier about these things penciling out or whatever else. If this does pencil out, where putting in one of these ADUs turns into a big financial benefit for a homeowner, then that, pushes the math a little bit there. And maybe some people in these more exclusive communities start thinking about this more if it turns into something that's a legit cash generator for them. So again, a lot to consider here. We'll see how this plays out. And Eric, thank you very much for that question there. Patrons, keep sending them in to Seattle News, Views, and Brews at gmail.com. David, need to wrap up with you, my friend. Are you getting worried that the Mariners have only won one spring training game? I saw you post about that. I wanted to check in.
No, I don't think I actually am. I feel like, a lot of those losses are at the hands of a single A reliever who never had any chance of making the team anyway. My hope is that, the Mariners seem to always start cold. So my hope is that they're getting that out of their system right now.
Get the cold out of the way now. They did have one tie, by the way. So we got that. Yeah. That's always the joys of spring training. So we'll see what happens there. David, thank you so much for joining me yet again. And thanks to everybody listening to this episode of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks especially to our patrons who support the show. Eric, thanks a lot for the question. Please get in touch and send some more questions to us patrons. We love hearing from you. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon and show your support. Thanks for watching on Converge Media, too. See you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2024.